All right. We are going to go ahead and get started. So I'm recording, and that's why you see me down in the lower corner there too. So, because actually Sarah's sister, and we'll give her a shout out because she'll be watching this later on. So, yeah. So Sarah's sister's been studying with us from New York, and so the other day Sarah stopped by and said. She called her like right after we got out of Bible study. Like, is it up yet? Is it up yet? I'm like, you know, so hey, Sarah's sister, so Vanessa, so that's why I record, especially then people, if you can't be here, trying to get that out there and others. So before we get started, we are going to be taking a look at how Israel and the rapture go together. We looked at the rapture last week. So, and actually over the next couple weeks, looking at different places. So how does Israel factor into the rapture? How does really the rest of the world figure into the rapture? And then, because sometimes it's discussed about, well, what's America's role in the rapture? We're going to talk about that too, okay? And so the next couple weeks, we're going to be taking a look at different things in the role of those in the rapture, and then taking a look at what the Bible says about the events that are leading up to the rapture. The signs out of Matthew, you know, these are the signs that have to happen. So we'll be taking a look at that over the next couple of weeks. So kind of stepping away from Revelation for just a little bit so that we can understand those a little bit better. Before we get started, do continue to remember Jane. Last time I talked to them, which maybe was Sunday, I think it was Sunday, she was still feeling pretty good. She's had 1 full week of treatments. This is her second week. And so she's still feeling pretty good, and just appreciates everybody's prayers. Colleen, have you talked to them today? Or
I talked to her just a few minutes ago. She was on the way to the doctor then, but she's feeling good.
Good.
I picked up some medicine.
Okay.
About
yeah. They're being very cautious about being around people. So Colleen is being their DoorDash Uber driver or Uber deliverer.
I wear a mask even when I go into her.
Yeah, so I know that they appreciate the prayers and even just the phone calls and just letting them know, but they're trying to make sure that they keep any stuff as best they can out as she goes through those treatments. So continue to pray for her. Pray for Charles and Eileen. Charles fell the other day. Didn't break anything, just sore. She did have to call, I don't think their son was home, so she did have to call 911 to help them get him up and check him out. But continue to pray for both of them as we move forward. So, any other prayer requests that need to be mentioned? All right. Well, let's pray. Lord Father, I just want to thank you for our day today. We thank you for the beautiful sunshine. We thank you for the rain that came yesterday. But we thank you that we can come into this place, into this house, to study your word as we look forward to your second coming. Lord, we celebrated your resurrection. We know that was be so that one day you'll step out and call us home. And Lord, that you would just guide us and direct us. And God, we're going to thank you, Lord, for all that you're going to do. And we're going to praise you for who you are. In your name we pray. Amen. Well, if you got your Bibles today, we're going to be in Genesis 12. We're going to be looking at the first 3 verses there. And we're going to be looking at Israel. And so I will say that a lot of what we're going to be looking at today has come from some different studies of David Jeremiah. So I'm really relying a lot on that and his study of Israel. But you know, we think of if we think about the world today and all of our time period, all of our history that we are aware of, that we've been alive, as it relates to the geoeconomic situations around the world. Okay, we've had countries that we make treaties with that then get broken, or countries make treaties and they get broken, or they make promises and they get broken. It's not often that we look in the modern world that a promise is kept over a long period of time. But there's a promise that God made to Abraham well over 4,000 years ago that is actually still in force today. And it is shaping how the world is today. And is going to shape how the world will end. And we know that God's promises are forever. Okay? We make promises, we break promises, but God's promises are there forever. Most Israelis and Jews living outside of Israel know someone who has been the victim of the Palestinian terrorism that goes on currently right now in Israel. I don't think we could ever imagine what it's like living with the prospect of some kind of injury or death due to constant terrorism in your country's region. We just can't imagine that. I mean, we've had 9/11, we've had some other things, but when I say constant, the daily living with the reality of what's going on in Israel right now. We need to understand that the term, when we hear it on the news, and I didn't even realize this until I started studying, the term Palestinian is a generic term that is used to refer to Arabs who were occupying that land prior to 1948 and were displaced when Israel became a nation. I assumed that Palestinians were a certain ethnic group or a certain... I did not know that until I read that. I'm like, how did I not know that? But it's a group of people. It's a generic term referring to all Arabs that were living in that area when Israel became a nation and now are in that area. The Palestinians resent that they were driven out and they want their land back and they want Israel gone. And what I mean by gone, I mean they want them erased. Okay? They want the Jews either to be killed or to leave their land and live elsewhere. And acts of terrorism are ongoing efforts to attack Israel's right to exist. Now, added there on your notes, Israel is a nation around 9,000 square miles. So being the good Googler that I am, I went on and I said, first I thought, I wonder how that relates to the size of Catawba County. Well, Catawba County is like 300 square miles, so it's like really less. But it's around the size of New Hampshire. So think about the shape of New Hampshire. It's around that size. And it is surrounded by some 5 million square miles of Arab nation that wants to see their destruction. If my cell phone is Israel, okay, you have the Mediterranean Sea, you have Syria, Damascus, Jordan, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Libya, Iran, all the way over to the west coast of Africa, nations that want to see Israel destroyed. In 1948, Israel's status as a legal nation has resulted in constant state of attacks. And thousands of Israelis have been killed by Palestinians. Thousands of Palestinians have died as a result of Israel's response. And Israel has never been the aggressor in any of the Arab-Israel conflict. I think that's interesting. And all the things that we'll take a look at in wars and conflicts going on, Israel's always been the defender. Israel has been willing to find a solution and even making concessions to the Palestinians, but often they are rejected because they do not include Israel no longer ceasing to exist. Israel is still fighting for its own existence, and when Israel takes the tough but necessary measures to defend herself, Israel is slammed by the world. But if she fails to take the measures, Israel is attacked by the hostile neighbors. So it would be like this, and I kind of thought about this today. Somebody breaks into your house. You defend yourself in your home. And people go, well, they should just be allowed to come in. You know, it's that same mentality. But if we didn't defend ourselves in our homes, then we would just be taken advantage of, right? Same thing with Israel. We have to understand that what's going on is not new history. I tell my religion students, conflict in the Middle East is not something new. This has been going on for thousands of years, okay? The descendants of Abraham were enslaved for 400 years. The 10 northern tribes were captured in 722 BC. The southern tribes were taken off in 586. The Romans crushed the Jews in AD 70. And for close to 1,800 years, Israel was scattered all over the world. There's only one factor that can explain why the Jews still exist today and are a nation. And you know what that factor is? God. It's God. One of the movies I don't want to say enjoy watching because of the nature of it, but it's the movie Schindler's List. If you've never seen the movie Schindler's List, I highly encourage it. It is very graphic as far as what the Nazis did to the Jews. But there's a scene in there right before they try to go and exterminate all these Jews out of the ghettos in Poland. The guy speaking says, we're going to get rid of history. He's like, if we could wipe out all these Jews, we could just get rid of all this history of all these Jewish people. It's not going to happen. The only reason why the Jews still exist is God. Ezekiel tells us in chapter 36, it says this, I will vindicate my holiness, my great name, which has been profaned among the nations, which you have profaned in the midst. Then the nations will know that I am the Lord, declares the Lord your God, when I prove myself holy among them in my sight. So as we take a look at Israel today, we need to understand that there's two reasons why there's a future for the Jews. One, because of the promise that God made to Abraham, and because of God's faithfulness to his word. All right. So I want us to take a look at Genesis chapter 12. So if you got your Bibles, Genesis chapter 12. And we actually looked at this when we studied Genesis on Wednesday nights several months ago. Now the Lord said to Abram, Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land which I will show you, and I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make you a great name, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So there's several things that I want us to see today, okay? So first of all, I want us to see that there's an unconditional effort. There is an unconditional effort, unconditional covenant. Okay? God says, I will, 5 times in these verses. He says, I will show you, I will make you, I will bless you, I will bless those, and I will curse those. 5 times he says, I will. God is not asking Abraham to reciprocate. He is stating what God is going to do for Abraham and all his descendants. He doesn't say, okay, Abraham, I'll do this, but you have to do this. In these verses, it's all about I will, I will, I will, I will. God will later confirm the unconditional nature. He does it again in chapter 15. God promised not to break that promise and took responsibility for keeping it. And this is not about equals. This is God promising to do something for Abraham and his descendants. It's unconditional, right? I mean, a lot of us, when we do something, hey, I will help you if you will do something in return, right? Sometimes what's called a quid pro quo. I'll do this, okay? Colleen, I'll come over and help you mow your grass, but I need you to help me do this, right? But no, it's an unconditional. He just says, God just says, I'm going to do this. I'm going to bless you. I'm going to provide for you. I'm going to bless your family. Okay? So it's very unconditional. It's also a personal covenant. God made the promise to Abraham. Look at verse 2. And I will make you a great nation. I will bless you, and I will make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. God uses the word you and your 11 times. Can you tell I like counting things? Here's the reason why. I learned very early on in seminary. A wise person said, when God says it more than once, you really ought to pay attention to it. So when you see I will, I will, I will, means you ought to pay attention. When the word you or your is used 11 times in 3 verses, there's a reason why. I learned that very early on, how to pay attention in that. The promises that God has are universal. But they began as a personal promise to Abraham. And God told Abraham to leave his land, head to the rich, abundant land of Canaan. And Abraham prospered, and he was promised a seed, and that his descendants would prosper. And Abram was so revered in his day as a powerful leader. And the personal promise of the land of Abraham's descendants through Isaac and Jacob was never rescinded and still is in effect today. Can you imagine making a promise with somebody at, let's just say, 5 years old and going, I'm going to promise you this. And let's say 60, 70 years later, you're still carrying out that promise. It would not happen. I mean, I think we were all with kids, right? We were all kids, I promise we're going to be best friends forever. Then we all went to middle school. And I saw boys and girls dating each other for 5 minutes. I love him. I hate him. I love him. I never want to talk to him again. We're getting married. I want to move. That's just a side note of the personal tragedy I experienced teaching middle school. But think about promises. I mean, it's amazing that there's still a promise that God has in effect today with the nation of Israel. It's also a national covenant. Part of the promise was not just to Abraham. It didn't stop with Abraham. So when Abraham passed away, it's not like God said, I've done that. His descendants. And what does God, so this is like, let's remember Bible 101. How many descendants did God tell Abraham he was going to have? They were going to be as numerous as what? As the sand, as the stars. Okay? And if you go to the beach and you pick up a handful of sand and you start trying to count the little grains of sand in your hand, you're going to be there for a long time. Now imagine a whole beach like that. It would be impossible. Okay? And in spite of millions of Jews who have been killed throughout the century, the Jews are still indeed a great nation. Although it is minute in its size, only has a little sliver of Mediterranean coastline, Israel has withstood continuing Arab onslaught, wars, boycott, and terrorism. But listen, it has turned itself from a poor, rural country into an industrial powerhouse. And it has even closed the social, educational, and health gaps, not only for the Israelis, but for the people of the region. So even though Israel continues to be attacked, they very much have helped the region as a whole to become prosperous. Think about that. I mean, most of us, if we were, well, some of you weren't, I was, ever beat up in school, okay? I won't go down that rabbit hole. Okay. But the last thing you want to do is after somebody beats you up, turn around and go, hey, can I help you with anything? Right? I mean, when that's the last thing we want to do. Somebody attacks your country, the last thing you go is, hey, what can we do to help you? But that's what Israel has done. We have been through this vaccine process. A lot of the advancements came out of Israel. All right? Some people don't want to recognize that, but a lot of that came out of Israel. And their advancements in technology and their understanding of things. And God has still promised that to them today. That's why if you look at that region right now, and you look at the countries and how well they're doing, Israel by far is outshining Syria, Egypt, Damascus, Iraq, Jordan. They're outshining all those nations. Iran, okay, which is what we're going to get to in just a second. Okay, but it is promised to all of those people. It's also a territorial covenant. God promises in Genesis chapter 15, he says it's pretty much the same thing. And I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great. Even in Ezekiel, the promise is reminded again. But God promised a homeland to Abraham. He promised him a homeland. Abraham was promised, and again, this is kind of something that you read it in Scripture, but then you have to kind of like, if you really look at a map and kind of draw it out, Abraham was promised a huge section of land. Okay? And so I listed it there. Modern day Israel, the country of Lebanon, what makes up the West Bank of Jordan, a large part of Syria, Iraq, and Saudi Arabia. That's a pretty good sized country if you were to take a look at it. And again, that's one of those things I read it in Scripture, when God tells Joshua, go this far and go this, it's a huge area. Okay? This land, and because Israel has never occupied all of that land, liberal scholars will say, well, that's not really true. It's more of a spiritual thing. It's only for heaven. But that's not the case. This land is promised is the most important block of real estate in the world. So let me ask you this. Why did Abraham travel all the way? Why didn't God just say, hey, Abraham, I'm going to bless you right here where you're at? Well, this was a promise about a literal land that would one day be filled. And it's the promise that God makes to him. And Israel has been contested over and over again. And Israel has been removed from the land 3 times. Once, when Joseph's people left and traveled to Egypt, they spent 400 years in Egypt until they left to head back to the Promised Land. 400 years, no Jews lived in that land. Second, during the Assyrian and Babylonian captivities, where they removed from the land. And then what is called the diaspora, which means scattering, after AD 70. Rome came into Jerusalem, totally destroyed the city, and all the Jews scattered. And from AD 70 until 1948, the Jews lived scattered all over They were even, for time in the Middle Ages, the Jews were almost run out of Europe. They've never had a homeland until 1948. So listed there, Jeremiah 32, Ezekiel 11, 20, 34, 37, Amos, all talk about the promise that God is giving to those people about their land. And this promise should be taken at face value. Because when God makes a promise, does he ever break it? No. So when the United Nations, following World War II, the United Nations created the homeland for the Jews. They carved off a portion of what had been historically Israel. Not all of Israel, but part of it. Part from Judea and Samaria, which is now called the West Bank, was for the Palestinians. But when the Palestinians and others attacked Israel in 1967, was called the 6-Day War. Okay? Israel won back the West Bank. I'm going to talk about the 6-Day War again in just a second because I found this interesting. I like history. I'm not a great history remember, but I like these kind of things. And Israel did not take it back by aggression. They won it defending themselves that God had given to them thousands of years earlier. And Israel regaining part of the land is a sign that we know that biblical prophecy is true. And it's an indication that we are moving into that second coming. So it's also a reciprocal covenant. So God promised to protect and bless Abraham and also bless those who bless Israel. Okay. So God said, hey, there in verse 3, I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. You ever seen those like mafia movies? You attack me, I attack you. That's my great Italian accent there, Hal. And I never seen the Godfather movies. Never seen any of those movies. But you know, it's that kind of thing. Hey, you mess with my family, I mess with you, all right? So that's basically verse 3. Hey, if you will bless Israel, God will bless you. Have you ever thought about this for a moment? You think about it. I mean, that verse is not, to me, is not rocket science. If you want God to bless you, bless Israel. You want God to curse you, curse Israel. And if we think about it, in ancient times, nations like Egypt, the Midians, the Moabs, the Babylonians, and the Greeks, and I should include the Romans in there, were all ruined when they raised their hand against Israel. Because not long, about 100 years or so after the Romans destroyed Israel, the nation of the Roman Empire started to go downhill. But think about that. All those nations raised up against Israel were ruined. In modern day, communist Russia was dissolved. Nazi Germany was crushed, lost all of its power. Okay? And the most foolish thing that any modern nation can do is stand against Israel. And you look at all those countries, okay, that are around, that are suffering because their hostility towards Israel. Now I want to go back to the 6-Day War for a moment, because I just mentioned that. So what was called the United Arab Republic was like Egypt, Jordan, and some of those countries, along with Syria, attacked Israel from all directions in 1967. It's called the 6-Day War. And in case you're ever on Jeopardy, it's because it lasted 6 days, okay? So just wanted to be clear that you all were understanding the 6-Day War lasted for 6 days, okay? All right? All from different directions. And although hopelessly outnumbered, Israel defeated all these nations and actually captured back vast amounts of land, including a large portion of the Sinai Peninsula between Egypt and Israel, what's called the Golan Heights, what's called the Gaza Strip, and what's called the West Bank, which were not part of the original Israel, but after the 6-Day War, they gained that land back. This tiny little country withstood itself against all these other countries. And if you think about in our history, when we have stood with Israel, not that there's always been a correlation, but there's been prosperity. When we've said, hey, we kind of sided with these over here, not been prosperity. Not going to get into a whole big political discussion. That's for later on, okay? We can have that separately. But you think about that. And several years ago, when the Jerusalem being recognized as the capital of Israel, what impact that had. That was a great stand. Okay. There's also a universal covenant. So we have to understand that the promise to Abraham was not to exclude, but it was to include. Abraham's descendants would be the rich repository of the knowledge of God of all humanity. Okay? Most of the Bible writers were Jewish. Now, I know what somebody's going to ask me in just a second. Pastor, we want you to name all the writers of the Bible books who weren't Jewish. I'll get back to you on that one. Okay? I've known you all long enough. Somebody's going to ask me that just to do it. But I'll get back to you. Okay? Okay? What? That's usually Jane. But I love those questions because it keeps me on my toes. Okay? So Jesus, right, was a descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Don't believe me? Go to Matthew and Luke. Go to the genealogies. You'll see it there. Okay? Yes. Christians and Jews are tied together. Okay? Muslims will talk about Abraham as a father, but not in the same way that Jews and Christians do. Okay? And listen, I think as a believer in Christ, there is much that can be learned from the Jewish people. Okay? If I sit down, and I tell this to my religion students, you sit down with a Jewish person and you break open a book of the Old Testament, we're on the same wavelength. Now, when you go to say Jesus is the Messiah, yeah, you lost them. But I know a lot of great Jews who have come to faith and accepted Christ as their personal Savior. But I think there's such a rich history there. We need to understand that. The land of Israel and the city of Jerusalem exist because of that promise thousands of years ago that is still being fulfilled today. And so the entire human race has been blessed by the promise to God to Abraham. Okay. So lastly, there's an eternal covenant. So this promise came in 3 stages, all in Genesis. Okay. So God initiated it in Genesis chapter 12. Right? He formalized it in Genesis 15. And then in Genesis 17, he amplified it. Because at this point, Abraham's almost 100 years old. And if you remember our study from about Abraham, man, God kept telling him, you're going to have a seed, you're going to have a seed, you're going to have a seed. And Abraham's like, okay, but when? But God formalizes this, and he provides that everlasting covenant. We looked at Ezekiel 39 several weeks ago about Russia. So prior to that is Ezekiel chapter 37. That's the chapter on Ezekiel's vision about the dry bones. Okay? And the vision of the dry bones coming back to life. I've read that passage before. Some of you have probably read that. And you go, oh, these bones come back to life. This is kind of one of those times when I've read something and go, never thought about it that way before. Because when I was studying this, I was thinking about this with Israel. And here's the relationship. The dry bones represent what we're seeing today. It's the coming back to life. It's the rebuilding. The bones are the rebuilding of the nation. That's not enough. They have to become spiritually alive. And Israel has not been made totally spiritually alive yet. Okay? Yet. But Ezekiel says that the breath of God coming into the resurrected physical bodies will happen. It will happen. Oops. It's going to happen. 2 prophecies that have yet to be fulfilled when it comes to Israel. 1, Israel needs to inhabit all of her promised land. Okay? Hasn't happened yet. We're getting closer. Okay? And she needs to turn to the Messiah. Now, here's what I think. Okay? Both of those, I believe, will happen in correlation with the rapture. Okay? So, as we studied the rapture last week, right? The trump of God sounds, the dead in Christ rise first. Right? As we're coming, because we'll look at the witnesses that come to share with the Jewish people, the 144,000. I think that Israel's inhabiting all of her promised land and the turning to the Messiah, all that is happening at the same time. Now, this is also one of those things, if you come to me and say, Pastor, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think this is going to happen. You and I are not going to get into a knockdown, drag-out fight over this, okay? We're not going to split the church. We're not going to have 3 pew aisles like over at Highland. All right, Kay? 3 pew aisles. We got split 3 ways. Okay? We're not going to be, this side agrees with the pastor, this side agrees, with Hal, and we're not going to do that. But, just, again, from looking, I think those 2 things are going to be coincided with the rapture. Because Israel's need to turn to the Messiah a lot of that happens during the tribulation time. And that's why I think those are going to be very closely related to each other. Okay? But all of this is in the fulfillment of God's time. And Israel is indeed a key factor in the rapture. It is. And any of our discussion going forward as we study God's Word, we cannot take a look at this without Israel and it being fulfilled in God's time. And I mean, it's the problem, and these times are approaching. And so, as we talked about the rapture, I want us to understand Israel's role. Next week, we're going to look at other areas of the world and how it relates to the rapture. Then we're going to look at how America plays, because people are, well, spoiler alert, okay, for 2 weeks from now, America is not mentioned in the Bible. I'm sorry to tell you all that, but America is not actually mentioned in the Bible. But we'll talk about how that happens. Okay. Any comments or questions other than to name the authors who are not Jewish out of the Bible?
I have a article just recently that you can take to when the second coming happened.
Yeah.
It was 1,260 years from the destruction of the temple in 70 to 1948 was 1,260 years. And so the second coming is supposed to happen either 360 times 7 or 1,260 years in the future, which it makes about 2,300 or 3,200, however you add it. I just thought that was interesting. I read that article and I thought, I just got to tell you about this.
Yeah. That's one of those when I tell my students sometimes when, I'll talk to my students about cults. And I said, so one way to know that it's a cult, if the person tells you that they're Jesus, turn around and go the other way. So somebody tells you, we got 1,200 more years after Israel came. Let's turn around and go the other way. So